The Wikipedia article ever so helpfully mentions that the author's favorite book is 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Yes, I could have guessed that, thank you. Three Apples Fell from the Sky is a book by Narine Abgaryan, an Armenian author writing in Russian. That's the legacy of the Soviet Union for you, when all of those Soviet republics spoke Russian. I don't want to say we're forced to, but close enough. Abgaryan says that she actually speaks a dialect of Armenian that is not always understood even in Yerevan, so it wasn't ever a question for her to write in Russian, and that's not even mentioning that she spent most of her adult life here in Moscow. She is an Armenian author writing in Russian, and she writes about Armenia. Her first stories, called Manyunya, are a humorous account of her childhood in Armenia, and some of her later stories are semi-autobiographical as well. Three Apples are not, and that's what we're here to talk about. The meaning behind the title is explained at the end of the book, so I'm not going to spoil it here, but it is reflected in the structure of the novel, so keep an eye out. As far as the teaser for the book that I can give you, I actually both love and hate the little blurb that the book gives me. It is a story of a small village lost somewhere in the mountains, and of its few inhabitants, all of whom are a little bit of an oddball, a little bit grumpy, but all of whom do contain multitudes. And the thing about that is that if you haven't read the book, it's not particularly grappling, is it? But if you have read the book, it's about the perfect description for it. It is a story of a village called Maran, lost somewhere in the mountains of Armenia, and it is a dying village because when we first get introduced to it, the youngest member of the community, our protagonist Anatolia, is 58 years old. One of the character remarks that Maran seems to be carved out of stone along with its villagers, and it's kind of true. It seems to exist outside of the reality, outside of time, only connected to the outside world via one road and a telegraph line, and when people leave, they rarely come back. So the village is left there to exist and live its ordinary life with its simple troubles. The narrative jumps back and forth between describing the current events and providing backstories for the characters and the village itself. People born and past, the quiet life of the village, but also war, hunger, and natural disaster, with a little bit of providence and magic thrown in. I actually love the book. It relies heavily on the emotional component, so if you can connect to the characters and the narrative emotionally, you'll likely love it as well. There's this earnestness and sincerity to the narrative that tugs at your heartstrings. This is not a book about complex plot lines or great turbulence. The troubles that the characters face are mundane, but also not. Their interactions simple, but in a very genuine way, like there is almost no scheming, for the most part, simply the characters who want to live their lives and build lasting relationships. They take life's challenges on and they go on. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. The village only has a few dozen old people left, and not because young people live for the big city or whatever, but simply because Maran had to go through periods of hunger, war, and natural disasters, so there are literally, quite literally, only a few people left. But what wonderful people they are. You grow to love these characters almost instantly. At a certain point, our protagonist almost dies, and it's not a spoiler, by the way. The book literally opens with her getting herself ready to die, so I was sitting there clutching my armrest, so worried for her. All these characters are so sincere and so bloody nice. They tease each other, they love each other. Even arranged marriages can work out because these people bond and rely on one another. There is a couple, he does not know how to read just yet, so she ends up teaching him. And so when they need to pass notes to one another, she writes hers in very big block letters instead of cursive so he understands. Or when a character wants to thank a doctor for helping him, he brings him a can of preserves and some cookies because it's all they have, but it's also a lot for them. Or when a character, a blacksmith, doesn't have the words to properly express his feelings for his wife, he makes her a flower out of iron, and it tugs at all of my heartstrings. I was like, oh, my babies, they're my babies. Some may say that they're not realistic, and I don't care. I want a book of wonderful characters who I can care about and who won't let me down. There are so many stories out there about terrible people, about morally grey ones, or complex ones, and it's perfectly fine, but sometimes I just want a story that's a little bit more black and white, and mostly white. This story is like that because there is arguably only one truly bad character, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Because the story is not about that. The story is about wonderful, good people who want to live, and the village, and its history, and its secrets. The book is also about this community, its customs and traditions of their lifestyle. Abgaryan takes every moment possible to highlight the dishes that they cook, what they grow for crops, how they dress, what they do for entertainment, admittedly not much. It allows for the image of the village to become crystal clear in your mind, and these people also become real. One of the villagers brings back her Russian wife, and she starts sketching everything that she sees in the village. And through her eyes, the eyes of the outsider, the villagers and us start seeing things that they've missed before. It ties into magical realism that I'm going to talk about in a bit, but it is also about happiness in small things, finding beauty in spaces where it could so easily be overlooked. The image that stuck with me is how one of the men makes himself a cup of kogel-mogel every morning, that's his favorite drink, and he takes it outside to watch the nature wake up. And as I read it, I got this impulse to make a ritual like that for myself, to keep myself grounded or connected or whatever else that the lifestyle gurus say that we desperately need. And in truth, I remember mornings like this in the country when the house is still asleep and I'm the first one awake, and I make myself a cup of tea and take it to the front porch and breathing the morning air that smells and tastes like nothing else. And there is nothing particularly special about these memories, but they stuck with me. This book is an equivalent of a memory like that. The village, the community, these people, and the slow flow of life. The obvious literary comparison to draw is 100 Years of Solitude. It's even called out in the novel quite cheekily. I actually haven't finished it when I first attempted it about 10 years ago now. This apparently is as far as I've gotten into it, but even like this, I was able to see the connection. The most obvious point of connection and comparison is obviously the setting, as Maran bears heavy resemblance to Makonda. But it's not just it, it's the feel of the book, but most importantly, magical realism. It's soft magical realism. For the good portion of the story, you can write it off as superstitions or old wives' tales, like when the dead come back to warn or haunt the living in their dreams. But then these instances begin to pile up and actual premonitions happen, or even miracles. But the thing about magical realism is that if you do it right, it feels totally organic. And here it does. Magical realism thrives in locations like Maran village that are seemingly caught in the web of time and stuck there. These settlements where the world doesn't feel real, like it's frozen. So when these people appear who can predict the future, or when a peacock protects a family, or when a miracle birth occurs, we are primed for it. Like we've been waiting for this to happen, like it was supposed to happen all along. Magic is subtle here, but when it reveals itself, it's extra satisfying. The magical realism brushes against our reality, though. There is a bit in the book where one night the village is flooded by the passing rats who are fleeing somewhere, and the villagers then retroactively acknowledge it as one of the first signs of the upcoming hardships or of the future hunger. In an interview, Abgaryan remembers a terrible earthquake of 1988 that shook Armenia, and she remembers that right before it, she looked outside and she saw that the birds were behaving in a very weird fashion. They were kind of clumped together and hovering over the ground because they sensed the earthquake coming. And maybe it's a reach to call it a moral of the story, but one of the motifs of the book is about noticing the signs that the nature or God or deity or providence is giving you. That's what magical realism is all about, isn't it? That magic exists if we're willing and ready to see it, and maybe we are just not willing to see the most obvious of things. It can be as simple as noticing the design of your iron fence makes up your initials, or maybe paying attention to the signs of your body, or the providence, or whatever deity that you believe in. I always struggle to talk about the books that I actually like. It's somehow that much harder for me to articulate what I liked about the book, rather than what I hated about the book that I didn't like. It's extra hard here because my enjoyment of the book relies entirely on my emotional response to the book. I've seen comments call it boring, and while I don't agree, I can see how if you don't get emotionally invested, it might not be a book for you. But I feel like it still might be a good book for you to read just to train that pesky empathy of yours. Because this book, it won't break your heart. It will take you on an emotional journey, but very gently and very carefully. Because the book, just like the author, cares about you in the same way that she cares about her characters. So yes, you will feel for them, you will love with them, you will mourn with them, you will laugh with them. And isn't that beautiful?